All right, guys. So LSU is expected to hire Brian Kelly, and I know to a lot of Notre Dame fans right now, you guys feel betrayed. I don't know if this was if Brian Kelly brought it up to the players. I don't know if he was able to bring it up to administration, maybe midway through the season, maybe somehow late through the season. But Notre Dame still has a chance of making it to the college football playoffs, and now this kind of news has kind of broke out. Like, I know this has got to be very detrimental to not only the administration, to the fans, but this has got to be detrimental to those players and to potential recruit that were this close for early sign day period to sign with Brian Kelly and Notre Dame. So I know it's got to be, you got to feel sad if you're a Notre Dame fan. I just hope that Brian Kelly was able to treat this right. If he was able to let players know, let administration know, let these kids know that, hey, I'm going to be leaving. But if he didn't do that, man, I'm telling you, man, we have lost a lot of character when it comes to these coaches. If he did not do that, we have lost a lot of these coaches, man, have lost, man, the character. Everything you need to know, man, about their character. If they pull, again, another kind of scummy move to do this. But Brian Kelly going to LSU, I feel like could be a good move for Brian Kelly, right? When you talk about some of the restrictions that Notre Dame has, right? You have the recruiting restrictions, right? You have the kind of academic, right? There's this academic policy where you have to meet this required standard, and it is a very, very high standard to get into Notre Dame. And for LSU is a very good university, but it's also one of those universities where it's a lot more lenient when it comes to potential recruits or potential people that are trying to enroll to the university. It's a lot more lenient compared to Notre Dame, the Stanfords of the world, some of these kind of Ivy League schools, these top tier schools. So as far as recruiting goes, Brian Kelly has an advantage. Let's just say that he has a really good advantage when it comes to recruiting, right? He has the state of Louisiana, which is one of them. I would definitely put him in the category of top tier elite. Definitely put them in the top 5 of probably right now in recruiting. If we're talking about all the states across this country, definitely the state of Louisiana is definitely in the top 5 there. And the good thing is that there's not really any competitors, right? The only really tough competitor right now is Alabama. But even Alabama, they don't really go in there, and it's not like they pull like maybe 7 or 8 guys from that state. They may get a couple, 2 or 3 blue chip guys, but for the most part, that state has a fence wrapped around it. And with Brian Kelly, that's going to be a target. It is keeping that fence on for the state of Louisiana. But again, you have an advantage when it comes to recruiting. You have all the resources there. You have a really good administration. You have great culture. You have great culture and great tradition. Excuse me. So a lot of advantages from Brian Kelly going to LSU compared to when he was at Notre Dame. So really, really good there. As far as just again, obviously the goal for LSU is to compete with Alabama. That's the goal. No, not only just to compete, you want to surpass them. And with 2022 and 2023 potentially, and with these years coming up, like 2022, 23, and 24 coming up, Texas going to the SEC, Oklahoma going to the SEC, it's going to be a lot more competitive, especially when it comes from a recruiting standpoint. Now, Brian Kelly has had no issue recruiting at all at Notre Dame. Matter of fact, you can make an argument it's the best that they've ever recruited, probably since the 70s, maybe the Lou Holtz days, maybe the 80s, the early 80s. So, again, Brian Kelly brought that program from, I wouldn't say a bad type of program, but it went from a mediocre program to now being an elite, a borderline elite to maybe elite top tier program. So you feel like if you're an LSU fan that Brian Kelly can bring that same prestige that he did to LSU. I definitely feel like there's going to be a lot more challenges for LSU, for Brian Kelly being there compared to, let's say, Lincoln Riley going to USC. I definitely feel like for Brian Kelly, one of the biggest issues that he did have at Notre Dame was bringing in a top-tier quarterback. And I know people will say, well, again, maybe that's just recruiting restrictions, right? Maybe it's the recruiting, maybe it's just academic policy, right? Ian Brooks has a very high GPA. A lot of these guys that have been to the University of Notre Dame have very high GPAs. But it's not like college athletes are stupid or anything like that. Right? How many quarterbacks have we seen, top-tier quarterbacks we've seen in the country that have really good GPAs? Right? There's a lot of them out there. A lot of top-tier quarterbacks, right? But Brian Kelly, he hasn't found a top-tier quarterback, right? The only guy, the best quarterback that he's ever had is Ian Book, and I would put him You can put him in kind of a low, maybe I wouldn't say a low tier, but a mid tier, right? Ian Book, best case scenario, is a mid tier guy. He's nowhere near an elite quarterback. He's not up there with the Bryce Youngs of the world, the CJ Strouds of the world, even his past predecessors like Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence or even Mac Jones. He's a decent quarterback at best. So that's probably the only thing that if you're an LSU fan, you got to be concerned with, is that he hasn't brought elite quarterback play. But as far as everything else is concerned, can we find some five-star offensive linemen? Absolutely. Can he find some five-star defensive linemen? Absolutely. Can he find some five-star defensive backs and running backs and receivers and other skill positions? Absolutely. Right? Brian Kelly can put one thing that we've learned about Brian Kelly, he can put one hell of a staff together, and Brian Kelly can recruit. He can definitely recruit his ass off. And again, you also got to think about, Brian Kelly had recruiting restrictions while being there. So just imagine if all that was let loose, what Notre Dame could be. And Notre Dame are still having top 10, top 15 recruiting rankings. So really the only thing that is the concern is that, number one, can he be innovative on the offensive side of the ball? Can he innovate this offense? Can he take this offense to a place that could be very similar to what LSU was like with Joe Brady? Steve Ensminger, right? One thing that we've seen when it comes to Notre Dame is that, again, their offenses have not been the best. Their offenses have not been innovative. Now, again, that could be because of the quarterback. But if you're, Brian Kelly, since he's been there for over a decade, he hasn't found that quarterback. And that could be a problem. Now, Louisiana has a lot of great talent. And again, you could potentially find that guy. But that is something to be concerned with, that while your time at being at a blue blood program, you did not find a quarterback. But again, when you have to look at the records, when you have to look at everything else that Brian Kelly has accomplished at Notre Dame, he is one of the most accomplished coaches in Notre Dame's history. That is something that you have to consider. And even though he's 60 years of age, you have to kind of question, how long is he going to be there? How long can he keep up? How long can he keep it up before he eventually retires? Because again, he is at that age. Will his stubbornness get in the way? Because he is stubborn a little bit. Will his stubbornness get in the way? Right. So there's a lot of things that you kind of have to consider. Again, I would not. This is a really good hire. I would definitely put this in the Billy Napier, kind of category when it comes to coaching hires. I wouldn't say that this was a great hire compared to Lincoln Riley going to USC. But I definitely feel like this is a very good hire for an LSU football fan. You got to be pretty excited. Again, there still are, the SEC is a conference that, that is starting to come up in coaching, right? Jimbo Fisher. Obviously, you see what Kirby Smart's doing. Nick Saban is still one of the best, if not the best coach right now in college football. But if you're an LSU football fan, you got to be excited that you do have an upgrade from Ed Orgeron. And that's pretty much all you typically need. All you need is someone that can recruit, someone that can develop someone at the quarterback position, and LSU can take off. We'll see if they could do that next season or maybe the season after. But again, if you're an LSU football fan, you got to be very excited about this opportunity that Brian Kelly has with LSU.